Sometimes people just don't want the truth because hearing it means the world they've built in their minds might start to fall apart. Like that idea you were sold since you were a kid. Love would come along one day and fix everything. That it would be pure, that it would save you, that the right woman would come and somehow heal all the parts of you that you've never dared to face on your own. This promise wasn't shouted, it was whispered. It came from childhood stories, from music, from movies, from everything around you. And without even realizing it, you started to believe it. Not because you're gullible, not because you're weak, but because no one ever gave you the tools to question the illusion. No one taught you to ask, what if that promise was never real in the first place? What if love, at least the version you've been chasing, isn't salvation, but survival strategy? And what if nature, the same nature philosophers warned us about or tried to tame, saw this whole thing coming? Nature didn't write fairy tales. He didn't craft bedtime stories or rom-coms. He wasn't interested in making you feel safe or warm. He wrote like a blade, sharp, honest, cutting right through the roles and masks we wear. And when he looked at love, at relationships, at how men and women navigate each other, he didn't see a Disney movie. He saw something raw, something complex, something most men still aren't ready to face. Here's the truth. You don't love her. You love the idea of her, the version of her that reflects the person you want to be. You love how she validates you. You love how her presence makes you feel like you're enough. But that feeling, that validation, it isn't love. And maybe, just maybe, what you're calling love is actually a well-crafted illusion. One that keeps you emotionally obedient. One that keeps you coming back, thinking you're being vulnerable, when really you're just hoping she'll fix the parts of you you've never dared to look at. Now here's where it gets even more real. Women, especially across generations, were never given open power. They weren't handed swords. They weren't handed spotlights. So they learned to operate in silence, not out of manipulation, but out of necessity. They became masters of influence in a world that kept denying them visibility. While men were taught to chase, to conquer, to take charge, women had to adapt differently. They weren't given the tools to fight openly, so they learned to fight strategically. They had to learn to guide from the shadows, to lead without appearing to lead. And the modern man? He still hasn't caught up. Men confuse softness for innocence. They confuse tenderness for purity. But a woman's tenderness? It's not just kindness. It's a form of power, polished, practiced, and precise. While you pour your heart out, thinking it's vulnerability, she's paying attention. She's listening, not just to your words, but to what's behind them, to your needs, to your fears, to your patterns. Not because she wants to hurt you, but because she learned a long time ago that knowledge is power, especially when you're not allowed to hold it openly. You think she's intuitive, and she is. But that intuition, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It came from survival. It came from needing to know who was safe, who could be trusted, how to stay one step ahead in a world that rarely gave her the upper hand. And the scariest part? Most men don't see any of this. Not because women are hiding it, but because men would rather believe the dream. You've been taught to idolize her, to put her on a pedestal, to believe she's the good girl, the muse, the healer. But what if those roles are just masks? Not because she's fake, not because she's malicious, but because she learned that those roles work, that those roles get her heard, that those roles keep her safe. Nietzsche didn't write to attack women. He wrote to shatter the myths men cling to about women. Because as long as you believe she's inherently more moral than you, as long as you believe her love is selfless and pure, you will keep handing over your agency. You will keep giving her power without even realizing it. And here's the thing, she doesn't take that power out of cruelty. She takes it because the system taught her to, because she learned how to survive by mastering the inner world, while you were busy trying to dominate the outer one. You're not being loved, you're being managed. And the wildest part, you like it. You like the comfort. You like being worshipped. You like the emotional anesthesia that lets you avoid the deeper work of facing yourself. Because if you stop needing her to make you feel whole, you'd have to confront all the things you've been running from, all the broken pieces you thought she'd come to fix. But here's the uncomfortable reality. You're not loving her. You're bargaining with her. If I give you my heart, will you make me feel complete? You're not looking for a partner. You're looking for a partner. You're looking for a savior, and she becomes that, not because she signed up for it, but because you placed her there. She listens not just to your words, but to the signals underneath them. Every vulnerability you reveal becomes a map, not so she can attack, but so she can position herself deep in your psyche, so she can become necessary to your sense of self. And here's what nature saw, long before any of us did. What we call love is often a subtle contest for emotional space. It's a silent game about who needs less, who pulls away first, who surrenders last. It's not about affection, it's about control, power, and the one who needs less, they hold more. You give her everything, your time, your attention, your sense of identity, and call that love. She gives just enough to keep you invested and calls that connection. But is that really connection? Or is it choreography? We've built a culture that teaches women to influence without seeming to lead. That teaches men to submit while thinking they're in charge. It's not her fault. It's not your fault. It's the result of centuries of conditioning where men controlled the outside world, and women learned to master the inside. And now in modern relationships, you walk right into it with a smile on your face. She doesn't argue. She suggests. She doesn't demand. She desires. And in doing so, she guides your thoughts, your choices, your very sense of who you are, without ever raising her voice. That's not manipulation. That's mastery. You call her mysterious, but is she really? Or is it just that you've never stopped to look beyond your own projection? She doesn't confuse you because she's hiding. She confuses you because you're not used to looking clearly. You're used to myths about women, about love, about yourself, and you've built your whole understanding of intimacy around those stories. You still think love is unity. She knows love is leverage. And when she pulls away, it hurts. Not just because she's gone, but because something deeper disappears with her, your reflection. The image of yourself that felt worthy, validated, needed. That's what haunts you. Nietzsche would tell you, you never truly loved her. You loved the way she made you feel about you. She was the stage, and you performed your worth upon it. When that stage was pulled away, it wasn't just heartbreak, it was collapse. The collapse of a story you didn't even realize you were clinging to. And now you're angry, not because she lied, but because she stopped playing the role you wrote for her. You didn't see her, you saw your idea of her. And when she stopped playing along, you called her cold. You said she changed, but maybe, just maybe, the real betrayal wasn't hers. Maybe it was yours, for expecting a real person to fit the shape of your fantasy, for loving the character you created in your mind and demanding that she stay in costume. Nature never condemned women. He condemned the men who refused to grow up, the ones who clung to stories, who wanted muses instead of mirrors, who searched for angels instead of daring to face actual human beings, in all their glory, in all their mess, in all their complexity. Because let's be honest, facing a real woman, not a fantasy, not a dream, not a projection, that's terrifying, because it means you have to drop the act too. It means you can't hide behind the idea of being a good guy anymore. It means taking responsibility for your need, your fear, your dependence. So the question is this: are you ready to stop blaming her? Because if you are, really are, then you're finally ready to look at yourself. Not with guilt, not with shame, but with clarity. And from that clarity, something powerful can begin. Not the end of love, but the transformation of it. See, you were taught that love is the highest virtue, that to love selflessly is the sign of a strong, good man. But what if, underneath all that selflessness, there's something else, something more fragile? What if that selflessness is actually emotional dependency dressed up in romantic poetry? What if all those grand gestures, all those declarations of devotion, are just fear in disguise? If I don't give her everything, she won't stay. So you give more. You compromise more. You shapeshift. You smooth your edges. You erase your own identity bit by bit to become what you think she wants. Not because you love her, but because you're terrified of being without her. This isn't nobility, it's submission, disguised as love. And while you think you're being brave, she's feeling something very different. Not admiration, not warmth, but control. Not the loud, aggressive kind of control. Something softer, subtler. Control through presence, through attention, through your willingness to orbit around her approval like a planet chasing the sun. Because here's a truth few are willing to hear. Love, when it's rooted in need, will never be equal. She might not ask you to change, but you change anyway. She might not demand loyalty, but you offer it without question. She might never say, "Obey me," but you obey anyway. Why? Because you've convinced yourself that her affection is your salvation, but she never asked to be your savior. She was just living her life, being herself, and you turned her into a mirror, a reflection of your worth, your identity, your value. And when that mirror cracks, when she leaves or changes or simply stops playing the role, you don't just feel grief, you feel collapse. Not because you lost her, but because you lost the story. The story that said, if she loves me, I'm enough. If she stays, I matter. But stories aren't truth. And when reality crashes through, you call it betrayal. When really, it might be an awakening. Nietzsche would say, you've been sleepwalking, and now you're being asked to wake up. The lie isn't that she has power. The lie is that you didn't see it. You called her gentle, but she was observant. You called her nurturing, but she was strategic. You thought she surrendered, but she was choosing, always choosing, because she understood something you never did. The one who sees the dynamic clearly holds the key. And now that the illusion is breaking, you start to remember. You remember moments she smiled, but something in the smile was calculating. You remember how she responded to your emotions before you even spoke them. You thought she was intuitive, and she was. But that intuition wasn't magic. It was instinct. It was survival. It was the way she stayed safe, the way she stayed close to power when she was never allowed to hold it outright. This isn't about blaming her, it's about seeing her, clearly for the first time, because you live in a world that sells love as mutual surrender, but practices it as mutual leverage. A world that calls vulnerability a virtue, but trades it like currency. A world where emotional openness is both admired and exploited. And when you finally see this, when you stop pretending, when you stop clinging to the fantasy, you're left with a choice. You either grow up or you break. Most people break. They go back to the dream. They look for another muse, another emotional mirror. They say, next time, I'll find someone better, someone different. But they won't, because they're still playing the same role, still chasing the same myth. Only the actors have changed. And unless you stop needing her to be the role you wrote, you'll never meet the real person behind the mask. But what happens when the mask is gone? What happens when you stop seeking comfort and start seeking clarity? You begin to see what was always there. Not manipulation, not cruelty, but instinct, survival. A woman who understood the game because she had to, not because she wanted to control you, but because this was the only kind of power the world gave her access to. So don't ask, is she ready to love me? Ask, am I ready to see her? Not the idea of her, not the projection. The real her, the one who is just as human, just as layered, just as complicated as you. Because only then, only when the fantasy is dead, can something true begin. And only then can you see yourself, stripped of the dream, standing in your own reflection. That's not the end of love. That's the beginning of revolution. And here's where everything begins to shift. Because once you stop projecting, once you stop expecting her to carry the weight of your healing, your self-worth, your unfinished emotional business, you finally make space to actually know her. Not as a fantasy, as a person, flawed, intelligent, dangerous, kind, human. And that kind of love, it's not soft and dreamy. It's not fairy tale material. It's raw. It's honest. It demands something from you. It demands presence, courage, accountability. You start realizing she was never here to fix you. That was never her role. That was a story you wrote so you could avoid facing yourself. Because let's be real, it's easier to fall in love with someone who makes you feel like you're enough than to do the work of becoming someone who actually believes that. And it's easier to think that her tenderness is some magical, divine energy than to admit it might be strategic, learned, refined over time, because she had to survive in a world that rarely handed her the kind of power you were born into. It's easier to imagine that her softness is innocence than to realize it's actually intelligence. See, she wasn't raised to conquer through force. She was raised to adapt, to intuit, to influence. Not because she's manipulative, because she didn't have a choice. While men were handed tools of domination, strength, status, control, women were handed tools of survival, emotion, perception, subtlety. So while you were learning how to speak, she was learning how to listen. Not just to your words, but to your tone, your rhythm, your silences. Every pause, every breath, every hesitation. She was scanning, learning, mapping, and not to hurt you, to protect herself, to make sure she wouldn't be caught off guard, that she could stay one step ahead. Because in the emotional world, that's the only form of safety she was allowed. So no, she's not fragile, she's precise. You think she loves with abandon. She doesn't. She calculates what closeness costs her. She knows exactly when to give, when to hold back, when to make you feel seen, and when to disappear just long enough to make you miss her. Not because she's cruel, because she learned long ago. The one who needs less controls more. And maybe you hate hearing that. Maybe you want to deny it, push back, say, no, our love is real. But ask yourself honestly, when you gave everything, when you showed all your cards, when you spilled your soul in the name of honesty, what did she give in return? Not emptiness, not lies, but precision. She gave just enough affection to keep you chasing, just enough vulnerability to keep you believing, just enough attention to make you feel special. And you called that connection, but it wasn't connection, it was choreography, a dance between need and influence, a quiet, brilliant balance of affection and distance. You mistook it for purity, but it was practice, it was art, because this culture taught women not to fight head-on, but sideways, not to demand, but to suggest, not to control, but to become the thing you crave. And in doing so, they shape you, not with words, not with orders, but with presence, with glances, with silence. And while you think you're leading, she's guiding. While you think you're offering strength, she's redirecting your steps. Not because she hates you, because the system taught her this was the safest way to survive love. And maybe now you see it. You see how you've been orbiting around her approval. You've been offering up your attention, your time, your identity, thinking that's love, thinking that's what it means to be devoted, thinking that the more you give, the more she'll stay. But she didn't stay because you gave. She stayed because it served her. And when it didn't, she left, and you called it betrayal. But it wasn't betrayal. It was strategy. The game changed, and she adjusted. That's what she was trained to do. Meanwhile, you're stuck wondering what you did wrong, blaming yourself, or worse, blaming her, calling her fake, cold, cruel. But the truth is, she just stopped performing. She stopped being the dream, the mirror, the muse, and you weren't ready to see her without the myth. Because as long as you believe she's morally superior, as long as you believe her affection is selfless and her love unconditional, you'll keep surrendering your agency in exchange for comfort. You'll keep playing the role of the devoted man, thinking that makes you worthy, thinking that makes you safe. But all it does is make you vulnerable to a game you don't even see being played. Because in this world, love isn't just connection, it's negotiation. Every relationship is a subtle contest for emotional real estate. Who gives first? Who withholds last? Who has more leverage? Those are not romantic questions, but they're real. And most of us, especially men, aren't ready to face them because we were never taught to. We were taught to believe, to chase, to worship. We were taught that her love would save us, that if we were just good enough, strong enough. This is where it gets uncomfortable, because when the illusion dies, the silence begins. And in that silence, something terrifying happens. You meet yourself. Not the version of you she reflected, not the curated self you performed in order to be chosen, but the raw you, the unfinished you, the one still aching for approval, for comfort, for certainty. And you realize it was never really about her. It was about what she represented. She was never the savior. She was the stage. And on that stage, you performed your worth. Now the stage is gone, and all that's left is the echo of your own need. Nietzsche would call this an awakening, the painful shedding of illusion in favor of clarity. A clarity that doesn't flatter your ego. It doesn't tell you you're a hero. It tells you you were hiding behind the myth of love as salvation, as purity, as this magical, unconditional force that was going to repair you. But real love isn't magic, it's a mirror. And most people can't handle that reflection because it shows you your expectations, your dependencies, your fears. It shows you the way you've confused devotion with submission, generosity with self-erasure, romance with identity loss. You told yourself you were being noble, brave, selfless. But let's be honest, you weren't being noble. You were bargaining. If I give enough, she won't leave. If I become everything she needs, she'll finally make me feel whole. But you don't need a partner for that. You need therapy. Because that need, that hollow ache, that belief that someone else's affection will finally make you feel complete, that's not love. That's abandonment trauma dressed in poetic language. And she didn't ask to be your healer. You made her that. She was just being herself. And you turned her into a mirror of your worth. So when she changed or pulled away or stopped affirming the image you needed, you didn't just feel heartbreak, you felt collapse. Because it wasn't just love you were clinging to, it was identity. And this is where most men break. Not because of her, but because of the story. The story that said, if she loves me, I matter. If she chooses me, I'm enough. If she stays, I'm safe. And when that story unravels, it's not grief you feel, it's panic. Because the scaffolding that held your sense of self together wasn't made of confidence. It was made of fantasy. So you scramble, you reach out, you beg, maybe not with words, but with energy. You try to reignite the illusion, and if that doesn't work, you move on to the next one. A new muse, a new mirror, a new woman to reflect your significance. And you tell yourself, this one's different, but she's not, because the roles haven't changed. Only the actress has. And until you stop needing her to play the part, you'll never meet the woman behind the mask. Because yes, she wears masks, not because she's fake, because she's trained by a world that taught her to survive through performance, through intuition, through emotional mapping. She was never handed control, so she mastered suggestion. She was never given authority, so she perfected influence. And now in modern love, while you're trying to lead with transparency, she's leading with subtlety. Not because she's trying to dominate you, but because this is the only kind of power she's ever been allowed to have. That's not manipulation, that's mastery. And here's the part no one wants to say out loud. You liked it. You liked being handled. You liked the emotional anesthesia. You liked the worship, the comfort, the illusion that someone else could carry what you refuse to face. Because facing it means changing. It means giving up the fantasy of redemption and learning to stand alone. Not lonely, alone. Complete, not because someone else completes you, but because you did the work. And here's where things start to shift. Not in her, in you. Because the moment you stop needing her to make you feel worthy, you can finally see her. Really see her. As a whole person. Not a fantasy, not a role, not a strategy, but a human being who's been navigating this same impossible landscape of love and power and vulnerability. And then something radical happens. Love stops being a transaction. It stops being leverage. It stops being this delicate balance of emotional currency and becomes what it was always meant to be, collaboration. But that can't happen as long as you're still asleep in the myth that says your devotion is love, that says giving everything is honorable, that says sacrifice is the proof of your masculinity. It's not. It's fear wearing a tuxedo. And the scariest part? She can smell it. Women don't just hear your words, they feel your energy. They feel when you're orbiting around their approval. They feel when your compliments are currency, when your attention is investment, when your vulnerability is actually manipulation in disguise. If I show you my soul, you'll stay. But she wasn't born to carry your soul. She's been carrying her own. And hers is heavy, because while you were taught to conquer the world, she was taught to conquer herself, to become pleasing, palatable, perfect. She was told to make you feel strong, important, chosen. And when she did it well, you called her loving, gentle, feminine. But now that she's pulling away, reclaiming her space, her power, her identity, you call her cold. But she's not cold. She's just done performing. And maybe so are you, because here's the truth Nietzsche was trying to point at. Not about her, but about you. You never really loved her. You loved the way she made you feel. She was your mirror, your muse, your emotional stage. And when she stopped reflecting that, you felt abandoned. But she didn't abandon you. She just stopped playing the part. And the moment you stop needing that part to be played, you start to see her, not the performance, the person. And then for the first time, real love becomes possible. Not because it's perfect, not because it's painless, but because it's rooted in reality, not myth. So what now? What happens after the illusion collapses, after the story unravels, after the mask falls? You're left with something uncomfortable, something raw, something real. A woman, not an angel, not a savior, not a muse, just a woman with complexity, agency, instincts sharpened by a lifetime of emotional navigation. And you, no longer the romantic hero or the selfless martyr, but a man, human, flawed, aware. This is where the work begins. Because until now, love wasn't about connection. It was about choreography. She played her role. You played yours. Both of you adapting, managing, adjusting, trying to get what you need without fully exposing what you fear. That's not intimacy, that's theater. But when the performance ends and you're left standing across from each other without the roles, without the scripts, what then? Then comes truth. She's not here to fix you. She's not here to save you. She's not here to be the missing piece in your puzzle. And if you still think she is, you haven't woken up yet. Because here's the uncomfortable realization. Real love begins where illusion dies. It starts when you stop needing her to be your answer. When you stop offering your soul like a currency. When you stop chasing affection as proof of your worth. That's when you can look her in the eyes, not with desperation, but with clarity and say, I see you. Not what you can do for me, not what you represent, not what you fulfill, just you. And she'll know the difference. She'll feel it in your presence, in your posture, in the way you stop trying to earn her and start respecting her. Not as a goddess, not as a puzzle, but as a person. This is what Nietzsche tried to expose. Not to vilify women, but to liberate men from the fantasies that keep them blind. Because as long as you believe she's purer than you, softer than you, more moral, more loving by default, you will always feel less. And when you feel less, you'll try to earn more. That's when you overgive. That's when you self-abandon. That's when you put her on a pedestal so high she can't even breathe. And when she pulls away, not because she's cruel, but because she's human, you crumble. Not from heartbreak, but from disillusionment, because the story collapses. And you finally have to face the reality that no one is coming to save you. No woman, no relationship, no affection is going to rescue you from the responsibility of healing your own pain. And that's where power begins. Not dominance, not control, but sovereignty. The kind of groundedness that says, I am whole, even without being worshipped. I am valuable, even without being chosen. I am capable of love, not because I'm needed, but because I'm present. That's the kind of man who doesn't need mass, his or hers, because he's not afraid of seeing things as they are. He doesn't seek leverage. He seeks clarity. He doesn't chase devotion. He builds partnership. He doesn't beg for intimacy, he creates safety. And that's the shift. Because for centuries, men dominated the external world. They ruled nations, built empires, wrote laws. But the internal world, the realm of emotional truth, subtle influence, psychological dynamics, that was shaped in silence, in shadows, by women who learned to survive in spaces where they couldn't demand, only direct. And now in modern relationships, those dynamics are still playing out, just more quietly. She doesn't need to raise her voice to guide you. She only needs to sense where you're weakest. She listens, not just to what you say, but to what you need. And instinctively, she adapts, not because she's deceptive, but because she was trained that way. And you confuse that adaptation for love. You mistake her awareness for affection. You think, she sees me, she must care. But seeing isn't always caring. Sometimes it's calculating, not out of malice, but out of necessity. Because survival isn't just about food or shelter. It's about relevance, influence, power. So she becomes what works. And you keep handing over your agency, not because she asked for it, but because somewhere deep inside, you're still afraid of facing the parts of yourself you've buried. And so you offer yourself up, your time, your attention, your identity, not as gifts, but as trades. If I give this, will I finally be enough? That's not love. That's spiritual bargaining. And the only way out is through the myth, through the illusion, through the story you inherited from fairy tales, from childhood, from culture. The story that says one day love will come and make everything okay. But what if love doesn't make you okay? What if love simply shows you where you're not? And what if that's the point? Not to be rescued, but revealed. Not to be healed by her, but to finally face the parts of yourself you've avoided your whole life. That's where real connection happens. When you don't need her to complete you. When you don't project your emptiness onto her presence. When you meet her, power for power, soul for soul, truth for truth. Not as a fixer, not as a fantasy, but as a partner. And then love stops being a performance. It becomes a revolution. Because now you're not playing a role, you're living a reality. You're no longer driven by fear or lack or desperation. You're choosing her, and she's choosing you. Not from a place of need, but from a place of sovereignty. That's where it gets real. That's where love finally begins. Not with illusion, but with awakening. So if this made you uncomfortable in a way that felt true, if it cracked something inside you that needed breaking, then don't just subscribe, share it, not for entertainment, but because someone else out there is still living the myth, still calling dependency love, still handing over their agency in the name of romance, and they deserve to see the truth too. Love isn't surrender. Love isn't fantasy. Love is clarity, and clarity, that's where freedom begins.